Hi, I'm Chad with Move Forward Guitar. This lesson is from our series, How to Memorize Guitar Notes. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you how you can use octave shapes to find any note on your guitar. First off, if you like all the diagrams from this series, including the diagrams from this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, Memorize Guitar Notes. But I am working on it right now as I'm filming this lesson, so it might not be available as you're watching the lesson. But once it is available, a link will pop up on the screen that will allow you to download it. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to download it when it is available. This is part 5 from our series, How to Memorize Guitar Notes. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So in the last lesson, I touched on octaves and explained what they were. In this lesson, I'm going to show you shapes that you can memorize that will help you find any note up and down the fretboard. And this is something that's usually pretty helpful for people to learn to help them find one note up and down the fretboard. And I think it's really useful to learn, but eventually you want to break free from it so that you're not always having to use this trick. But I think it's a really good starting point and will really help you out. And again, this is just one trick of many that I'm going to show you in this series. So if it's not the best for you, watch the other lessons. I guarantee you'll find stuff that will really help you out. Like I said, everyone learns differently, so I'm just trying to give as many different tips and tricks as I can so that you can pick and choose what you think will work best for you. So first off, I'm going to show you 6 octave shapes to memorize, and then I'm going to show you how you can use them to find any note up and down the fretboard. And really there's only 4 octave shapes because some of the shapes repeat, but I call them 6 octave shapes because it's starting on each of the strings. So there's going to be 1 octave shape starting on each one of the strings. So starting on the 6th string, then the 5th string, then the 4th string, and so on. So just to reiterate what an octave is in case you don't remember, an octave is 2 notes with the same name that are different in pitch. So for example, if you played your low E string and then on the same string, the 6th string, played the 12th fret, those would both be E notes, but the one on the 12th fret would be an octave higher. And in this lesson, I'm going to show you shapes that don't play on the same string. So they're going to be on 2 separate strings that you can actually hold and play at the same time. And I'll explain how this will help you out. And we're going to look at these diagrams vertically just while I'm showing the shapes, and then we'll go back to looking at it horizontally. So just to make sure that you understand how you're looking at this, this is your 6th string now, and this is your 1st string. And then of course these are your fret wires and these are your markers. So we've just taken the horizontal fretboard like this and turned it up so that it's standing straight up, because before this was your 6th string and this was your 1st string. Now this is your 6th string and this is your 1st string. And I'm just showing it this way because most chord diagrams or smaller diagrams are shown like this, and it's a little easier to visualize. I only show it horizontally when I have to show the whole fretboard. So octave shape 1 starts with your lowest note on the 6th string. And the way you find the octave is to go up towards the body of your guitar 2 frets and then down towards the floor 2 strings. So we would go 1 fret, 2 fret, and then 1 string, 2 string, and that's where your octave would land. So these are both the same note but an octave apart. And technically what's shown on this diagram, these will both be G notes, but we're not looking at the actual note names right now. We're just looking at the shapes. We'll talk about note names later. So I'm going to show all of these in the same location on the fretboard. So I'm not actually showing shapes that have all the same notes with each other. So for example, this first one will be G notes, the next one will start on C, and so on. Later we'll talk about how we can use these to find one note up and down the fretboard. So this is octave shape 1. Start with your lowest note on the 6th string, go up 2 frets towards the body of your guitar and down towards the floor 2 strings. Octave shape 2 starts on the 5th string, and it's actually the exact same shape. It's just on the 5th string now as your lowest note. So you start on the 5th string, go up 2 frets, go down towards the floor 2 strings, exact same shape, and that's an octave apart from each other. Octave shape 3 changes up a little bit, which I'll explain in just a second. So now we're going up towards the body of the guitar 3 frets and still down towards the floor 2 strings. So 1, 2, 3 frets and then 1, 2 strings. That's an octave apart. And the reason that this shape is different, the reason you're going up 3 frets now instead of 2, is from what I mentioned in an earlier lesson when I talked about how the guitar was tuned, and how it was tuned between these 2 strings was different than all the other string sets. And I mentioned before that anytime you hit the 2nd string, to keep the same shape that you had previously on the other string sets, anything that hit the second string would have to move up 1 fret or 1/2 step. So since this note right here is hitting the second string, we have to move it up 1 fret or 1/2 step, and this is still in octave shape. Now we're on to octave shape 4, and it's the exact same shape as the last one because you're not hitting that second string again, so the shape stays the same. So octave shape 4 starts on the third string with your lowest note, goes up 3 frets, 1, 2, 3, down towards the floor, 2 strings. So now we're on to octave shape 5, which starts on the second string, and this one changes up a little bit. So now the note that's on the second string is actually the higher pitched note instead of the lower pitched note like we did before. And that's because we're going to go up towards the body, but then up towards the ceiling this time instead of down towards the floor like we did. And you'll see why these octave shapes are like they are as we go through and find notes on the whole fretboard, because there's more ways you can get octaves than what I'm showing you, but these are the most important to memorize for memorizing notes up and down the fretboard. So like I said, you're starting on the 6th string but with the higher pitch note this time, and you go up 2 frets, 1, 2, but then up towards the ceiling 3 strings, 1, 2, 3. And these are an octave apart from each other, and this one right here is your lower pitch. And then the last octave shape is different than the rest, which you should already remember this one from previously, because I mentioned that anything that was on the 6th string was the same note on the 1st string, but they're 2 octaves apart. So this one's starting on the 1st string, we're starting with the higher pitch again, so on the 1st string, and then in the exact same fret you just go to the 6th string, and it's 2 octaves apart now. So that should be a pretty easy one to remember, since you should know that both of your low open strings are E notes, and I told you before those are 2 octaves apart, so that means any note that you fret on the fretboard are the same note name, just 2 octaves apart. Now octaves are something that you can actually use when you're playing, and in jazz they're used all the time. Someone made them really famous, Wes Montgomery, a great jazz guitarist. He would play octaves together, the 2 notes together, instead of just playing a single note a lot of times, and it just adds a really unique sound, and it's a very specific sound that you'll recognize. Once you know what you're hearing, you'll recognize it anytime someone does it. So that is something you can do as a more advanced player, but the reason we learned it for this series is to be able to find notes up and down the fretboard, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. So we can start with any note, and using octave shapes can find that same note up and down the whole fretboard. So I'm just going to start with the E note because it's one of the open strings. And the thing you want to do is start with the note that's closest to the headstock, which is down here on this diagram, and then you're going to work your way up towards the body of the guitar. And if you're starting with a note that ends up down here, and there's, for example, the E note is starting on the 1st string or the 6th string, always start with the 1st string. So what we can do is start with this E note, and now we're going to just find, starting as this is our starting point, find all the other E notes up and down the fretboard. So what we do is, since we're on the 1st string, that's octave shape 6, which you should remember. So we would go in the same fret up towards the ceiling to the 6th string. So there's our next E note. From there we're starting on the 6th string, so now we use octave shape 1, which went over towards the body of the guitar, 2 frets, and down towards the floor, 2 strings, which would end up right here. So that's our next E note. So as you can see, we're just finding the E notes, every one moving this direction towards the body of our guitar. So now we're on the 4th string, and that's octave shape 3, and that one went up towards the body of the guitar, 3 frets, and down towards the floor, 2 strings. That would end up right here. There's our next E note. Now we're on the 2nd string, that's octave shape 5. This is the one that reversed and went up towards the ceiling, so we went up 2 frets and then up towards the ceiling, 3 strings. That ends up right here. Now we're on the 5th string, that's the same shape as octave shape 1 that starts on the 6th string. Again, that goes over towards the body of the guitar, 2 frets, and down towards the floor, 2 strings. That ends up right here. That's our next E note. And now we're on the 3rd string. This is our last octave shape. This one's the same shape as the one that started on the 4th string, and that again goes over 3 frets, down towards the floor, 2 strings. And there's our next E. And that's our last octave shape, because this E right here is 1 octave higher than this E, because now we're in the 12th fret, or 12 frets apart. It's the 12th fret since we started on the open strings. But anytime you end up 12 frets higher, now everything just repeats. So again, from this 1st string, we're just going to repeat what happened here. We go up towards the ceiling to the 6th string, then we're repeating what happened right here. We go to this one, then we're repeating what happened right here. We go to this one, and then for what I've drawn, we've run out of room. If you have an electric, you probably have more room, then you could go back up to the note that would be right here. So just by using octave shapes, I could start on one note and find that same note up and down the whole fretboard. So for example, if I started on C, the C that's closest to the headstock is this one. I'm on the 2nd string, I would use this shape. Then from there, I would use this shape. Then from there, I'd use this shape, and so on. All the shapes stay the same just depending on what string you're starting on. It wouldn't matter what note I'm playing. It just is based on what string I'm starting on, which is what I showed you with the octave shape. So I could find any note doing this. I could find all the F sharp or G flat notes, and that one that's closest to the headstock is right here. And then I would just use the octave shapes that correspond to what strings I'm on and do the exact same thing. Those patterns stay the exact same. I'm just on a different spot on the fretboard because I'm playing different notes. And if I was going to find all the Fs, for example, I'll just clear the other notes off. These are F notes, but this pattern would stay the same no matter where I moved it on the fretboard. It'd just be in a different spot on the fretboard. So I would start with the one closest to the headstock, and there's two that are close to the headstock in the same fret, so I always start on the 1st string, and then I just go through the octave shapes like that. I end up an octave higher on the same string that I started with, and everything just repeats. So now I just repeat everything that happened down lower. So everything right here is happening right here, and then depending how many frets your guitar has, if you have an electric, it'll probably go higher than that. So you can make a little game out of this and get really quick at doing this. So you can just start with the open strings, start with open E, and do exactly what I did. Start with the one on the 1st string, go through all the shapes, finding all the E notes, and just start really slowly at first, but eventually you're going to build your speed doing this. And each time you play the note, say the name, and that's really going to help solidify where it lands on your fretboard. That'll really help you out and what the actual sound is. Go through, find all the E's. Once you've done that, you can find all the A's, all the D's, all the G's, all the B's, and just start with the open strings each time. And just stay with one note. For example, stay with E until you can get pretty quick at it, and then you can even set a metronome and play along with the click and speed up the metronome and get faster and faster. So you could just set the click really slow, even at 40 beats per minute. On every single click, play one note. For example, you play the 1st note on the 1st click, then you play the 2nd note on the 2nd click, then the 3rd note on the 3rd click, and so on. And then eventually you'll be able to speed that up. And just make sure that you're hitting those notes right on the click and saying the note name as you play them. Once you can do that pretty fast with one note, one group of notes, so all the E's, then move on to A, do the same thing. And this is just something you could practice a little bit each day, and over time this is really going to help you visualize where all the notes are. And one way this can help you later is once you get good at this is, for example, if you were on some note up here and didn't know what it was, you can reverse the octave shapes in your mind. So this would be the octave shape right here, and then maybe you still don't know what that is, but maybe you know your 6th string really well, so you can reverse it one more time, and then maybe you know that this is a G and this is an A, so that would mean in between is a G sharp or an A flat. And eventually you want to break free of having to do that and actually reverse it, but starting out, that's a really good thing to do and be able to do, and it'll help you visualize where everything is. But like I said, I'm going to give you lots more tips and tricks of different ways to do it. This is just one trick for finding notes up and down the fretboard. I think it's a good one, a useful one to learn. It'll take time to learn, but I think it's worth it. And then eventually I'm going to show you ways to break free from this, or other ways you can do it without viewing octave shapes as much. So that's how you can use octave shapes to find any note up and down the fretboard. Go ahead and move on to the next lesson, where I'm going to talk about unison shapes. And be sure to download the e-guide. All the diagrams are in there. And be sure to subscribe, because we add at least one new lesson every day.